welcome everybody. We'll do our do our best to keep you all awake here after dinner. So we've got the really nice and cold, wonderful dinner, and we'll see if we can keep everybody going and attentive here. Lance Gartner, became a mentor back in I don't know, 2006, 2008, something like that. We started working with many different experiments. It seems like when we changed our management, we just jumped in with both feet and hope we hit bottom before our head went over. Went over our head, and so we're always trying new things. We're always looking to experiment. Today I'm going to talk mainly on winter grazing and bale grazing strategies, things we've learned over the years, the mistakes we made, and the things we've learned to help out. This is the home unit. The headquarters is right down here. You can see from the terrain of the land, it is very rugged. And so we took that as our unfair advantage, and we capitalized on it. So that's where we use our winter grazing. Our summer pastures are outlying from home. This will be a summer system. Otherwise, there's a summer system over here, one down here, one way up 20 miles to the north. And then these will be our winter pastures because they're very rugged, and we will calve on these pastures. So like we'll calve on this system one year, this system the next year. We calve May 20th and early June, and then we'll get off once the cattle leave those pastures in June. End of June, we stay off those pastures until fall, until winter. So right now we still have no cattle here at all yet in the home place. We'll probably be gathering cattle towards home middle of December. Then we'll wean, and after weaning, we'll kick the cows out here for winter grazing. When we started winter grazing, we pulled all the crops out from underneath the cattle. We just said we're going to quit cold turkey. We quit feeding hay until the grass ran out. So we would graze until the grass ran out. So some winters it would be March. We'd finally go to bale grazing. So to maybe bale grazing until grass in late April or whatever, early May. We didn't feed supplements anymore. The mistake we had made was we had the wrong type of cattle. We were still the larger frame semi-tall cattle, and we didn't make the connection to start with, and we totally had a wreck. 2 seasons in a row, we had 30% opens. That was a tough financial hit to take, but yet it got us to where we wanted to be in a huge hurry. We were lucky that the cow call market was good those 2 years. So that's the only thing that was a saving grace for us. We are now at about 1,050 to 1,100 pound cow size. We're always looking for about a 3 to 4 frame. They got to be easy fleshing. Let's say we used to be Tarrantay semi-tall cross. Now we're more of an Angus Tarrantay Hereford cross. Like I said, May, June calving. Everything calves under range. The heifers are out in the hills with the cows, calving 2.5, 3 miles from home. And if we do have to get something in, they're gently enough where we can set up a couple of panels behind a trailer, like 3 or 4 panels, just to you, and just walk them right around, and they load up really nice with the disposition. Our older semi-tall cattle, you can never have done that with. We wean December, give or take. We weaned as late as January. We've weaned as late as February a couple of years. That didn't work the greatest for us because we had the wrong type of cattle again. We have not been brave enough to go back to February weaning yet, just because it's still too vivid in our minds, the wrecks we had in the previous 2 years that we tried it. We generally sell our grass calves. We wean our calves, and we'll supplement them through the winter on just long hay. And then sometimes we'll sell the top end of the steers in April, but we'd like to keep them over till fall and sell them as long yearlings. So we got thyme and grass stuck into them. Grass, thyme, and hay is all we got stuck into them. Minimal inputs. We want to survive on what the ranch produces. Some people say, well, doesn't the ranch produce grain? Yes, but I don't like grain. When we used to feed grain to our calves, I had a sinus infection all winter long. I hated it. So now we've quit feeding grain. We haven't fed any grain to anything since probably about 08, except for the milk cow. She gets a little quart of grain every time we milk her as a treat. This is our cattle here. Smaller frame, easier fleshing. Nice sized calves that side here. The bull selection we choose for easy fleshing on grass. We choose for disposition because our kids are our hired labor. So our 8-year-old is out there helping, as well as our oldest daughter who's on the ranch with us, who's 27. So, and we've been doing this for a long time. So from the time the kids are 3, 4, 5 years old, they're out there helping with the cattle. So disposition is very important. Longevity, when we choose bulls, we want them out of a cow that's 10 plus years old with a perfect udder. Because we want longevity in our herd. We don't want to be changing up. It costs too much money to develop these heifers. So that's what we're always looking for in our bull selection. This is one of our 3 to 4 frame bulls here. Just the heart girth capacity on there. This guy came through the winter last winter. We had our bulls in the pasture. We rotated them through about 3 different pastures last winter. The bulls never saw a bale of hay all winter. We had someone from our SCD out this spring looking at some plans we wanted to do for cross fencing. We happened to drive through the bull pasture, and this would have been late March, early April, and this guy was just like, you know, these bulls look good shape. And I said, they haven't had any hay at all this winter. And he said, this is strictly grazing. I said, yes. So they're easy fleshing. They can take that dry stockpiled forage and convert it. The winter grazing management, the number one thing we wanted was we wanted the cows to work for us. We want them to do the work because we got tired of making hay all summer, hauling it all fall, feeding it all winter, hauling manure. It seemed like that's all we were doing. And we were feeding hay for 5.5 to 6.5 months a year. What forced us into this was we were farming with my dad, and my dad had a heart attack in 2000. We just got the operation to the point where it could sustain 2 families. He had a heart attack in 2000, absolutely could not work anymore. So labor-wise was the thing that pushed us into this. That forced us into no-till, that forced us into a winter grazing scenario, bale grazing, just simplify things. One thing we've learned about bale grazing, we did experiment bale grazing on native pasture once. I don't care to do that again. We had a lot of cheatgrass come in. It just kind of, all that extra nutrients, that nitrogen load from those bale grazing spots really seemed to mess up the native prairie. So it just didn't work for us. We try not to do that. We have some old fields that were planted back to grass in the mid 1950s, and literally there's bare spots, and you'll see some pictures of this coming up. There's bare spots the size of this dance floor here, and there's absolutely nothing growing on it. So what we'll do is we'll set bales on there, and our main goal is organic matter. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. As I mentioned earlier, with the calving, we'll graze in early May or June, or late May, early June a little bit, but then we get off until fall. Some pastures are strictly stockpiled, no grazing at all until fall. We rotate the pastures in the wintertime. You can, we did a lot of cross fencing in our pastures, and that's mainly to keep a higher level of plain and nutrition for them cattle in the wintertime, so they can, otherwise they eat the ice cream out right away, and they're looking for they're eating the cardboard box at the end for too long, and they start losing condition. So by keeping a higher plain of nutrition to those cattle, they stay in much better shape. The supplement, if necessary, our supplement is either going to be hay, salt, mineral, and apple cider vinegar, which we'll talk about a little bit later also. Back in 08 was one of the early years that we had started winter grazing. This was the year that we had the fallouts of the larger semitals. But we also did, through soil conservation, we did some nut ball tests on the cattle, and these tests would have been in March. we moved into fresh pasture, and the pastures were still coming up with that stockpiled forage of 8.8% crude protein and just about 58% digestible organic matter. The test showed we were slightly low on energy. So energy is always our little bit of a weak point there, and that's where, since we started apple cider vinegar, that kind of picks up the slack on the energy. You can see our the rough hills we have here. It's nice flat down in here, but it's kind of a blustery day. The cows are kind of picking and mingling. They're tucked in down out of the wind. These cows here are probably trailing back from water. We went out and did some clippings the other day here just to see what we got. We did have some nice rains in June, okay rains in July, and then August was a little on the dry side, but then September was okay again. We did 3 clippings in this pasture here. We ended up with just under 4,000 pounds of dry matter per acre. If you're going to winter graze, you have to have something there for the cows to find, because once you start getting that deep snow, if there's nothing for them to dig for, they will lose condition in a hurry. They have to be able to get the reward of nutrition and energy through all that work they have to do for digging through snow. You come out into pastures in the wintertime, and you'll see, well, there's nothing left out here, but you dig down in the snow and there's nice grass there. Cows can do it. It was harder to train ourselves than it was to train the cows. You got a few cows that, yeah, they'll hear a tractor and they stand by the gate waiting to be fed, but after a couple of days, they do learn, and they do go out and follow the rest of the herd. I believe this was a January time frame here on this picture. We brought the cows home from an outlying pasture, and we dumped them in here, and they were picking through snow. You can see mouths full of grass here that they're pulled up out of the snow. Good flesh, and just a lot of good forage there for them. You see the one here that's ripping some grass up out of the snow. You have your tougher winter days where there's a lot of snow, and then you get your January thaws. 2 winters ago, we had, I'm sure y'all remember it, every week we had a blizzard, 5 weeks in a row. By January, there was so much snow on the ground, and we started bale grazing that year, and I think I have the numbers later on. We started bale grazing in December that year, and I figured it's going to be a long, long winter. And we ended up, I think we were back to grazing by February 20th that year. We had a warm spell in February. The hay was gone, or the snow was gone. We were able to go back to bale grazing, and we went back to winter grazing, stockpiled forages, and the cows did great on it. Our goal was always to feed as least as possible. I mentioned earlier that when we started winter grazing, we would graze all the grass through the roughest parts of the winter. We wouldn't feed any hay until the grass is all gone, then we'd feed hay. Well, over the years, we finally wised up. If the weather's ugly, feed some hay. So what we've accepted now that, the coldest time of the year is usually that December 20th to end of January, that 5 to 5.5 week period in there. So that's the period that we'll usually bale graze if the weather is cold. If it's nice, we'll let them winter graze. But that hay just has a little bit of quality of feed, and it gets them through the cold periods better. More pictures of cows nuzzling through the snow. It's amazing watching the cows. Some of them are workers, and other ones are followers. And the workers will kind of, open up the area and nuzzle down and really push the snow aside. And then another one will come along and she'll knock her out of the way, and then so that worker cow has to go open up a new area. So this was an interesting system here. The cows are on the west slope of a hill, east slope of a west hill. So the cows are on the west slope, east slope facing west. I hope you're following that. I confused myself. Anyway, we had a storm from the east, and it laid all the snow here on the west side of the hill. And after the cows moved out of there, they grazed up to where the snow got too deep and they quit. So this hill here, after the snow melted in the spring, we could have came back to that paddock and hit that one more time if we would have needed to. So it's like, yeah, we're not getting even utilization when there's snow on the ground, but we're taking what nature gives us and we're working with it. This was an experiment we had one year. I say we're always trying something new, we're always experimenting. And one of our holistic goals is that we accept failure as a learning opportunity. We had 11 bred heifers on a property that year that was probably about 2.5 miles from home. And winter set in. We couldn't get the heifers home. We couldn't even get to them with a front wheel assist tractor. We had to walk in to check them. So we didn't even check them. And we left them down there all winter. We checked them like once a month. We'd walk in just to make sure they were still alive. Yes, they lost some body condition. They probably were down to, by the time the weather broke in the springtime, they were probably down to about a 4.5 to a 5 body condition, which isn't that bad. I mean, I'm not afraid. There was a study done in Montana that shows that cows actually have more longevity that if they lose and gain body condition throughout the year, rather than a cow that is a 6 body condition all year long. They have less longevity than a cow that fluctuates. So we're not afraid to lose a little body condition on these animals. We don't like to go down to a 4.5 or below, but it's you do what you have to do at times. But these heifers, they all made it through the winter, and you can see how deep the snow was that they're plowing through to get down to the grass. The failure of that experiment was we had 3 abortions out of the 11, and that was the minor part of it. That was the initial loss. The next loss came at preg checking time. Of the 8 that hadn't raised calves that year, 5 came in open. They were just too stressed, and I think if they would have been older cows, they might have survived a little better. But those young bred heifers, they lost too much condition before calving. They did not breed back. Speaking of condition before calving, our goal is to winter graze as much as possible, standing stockpiled forage. But what we are hoping, if we were to calve April 1st or April 15th, we could never do it because our cows drop. We'd like to see our cows at about a 6 body condition by the time calving starts. And if they drop down to a 4.5, even 5 body condition by the end of winter, and then they calve, you have trouble rebreeding. So we want to see, that's why we went to late May calving. We went to May 20th calving because they usually get a good 3 to 4 weeks of green grass before calving. By the time they calve, they're back to a 6 body condition again. So when the weather is cold and stormy, or you get a warm spell and the ice and the snow crusts over and it can't break through the crust, we'll go to bale grazing. As I mentioned, we bale graze on cool season pastures only. It seems like you got to put out at least 3 days worth of hay. You got to put out enough hay so that everything can eat at once. And that seems to be like at least 3 days worth. And it seems like if you go much more than 6 or 7 days, say you go on a 7 day, say you put out enough for 7 days, the first 3 days they're eating ice cream, then they got a couple of days of eating the mediocre stuff, and the last 2 or 3 days they're eating the cardboard. So the plan of nutrition is fluctuating too much. So that's why we don't like to go more than 6 days. This spring, the snow was gone. We thought we could, March 1st, we went back to standing forages again because we had enough snow gone that we could do that. And we ended up, with the cool spring, we did not get the grass growth that we wanted. So April, we ended up having to feed 10 more days of bales just to get them through. But it was so muddy and cool weather that we couldn't put out 6 days at a time. We put out 3 days at a time because otherwise they would just trampled it in the mud and we'd never gotten through it. And they're just wasted a lot more than what we'd like to see. And as mentioned earlier, there's no such thing as waste. It's organic matter and it's feeding the soil. Our goals for bale grazing is to increase organic matter on those bare spots and for nutrients into the soil. We had a tour on our place this summer, and Jim Garish was one of the speakers, and he asked the question of, how thick are your bales? And we're like, okay, so he's doing the calculations in his head. He's like, boy, you guys realize how much nutrients you're putting down per acre? Way too many nutrients. You got more nitrogen per acre than what you ever want to even consider. So we pondered that. And we told him that day, we said our main goal was organic matter. We didn't even think of the nutrient load. We've talked about that a lot as a family since then. And it's like we've come to the conclusion that we're willing to put up with the excess nutrient load to build the organic matter, because we will not come back for 3 to 4 years on the same location. So that nutrient load has time to dissipate and decrease. We try to place bales before the winter starts, that everything's out there in the fall, but it doesn't always happen. The hay type, we like to have some good quality hay, some poor quality hay. Last year was an extreme. We had some really good quality alfalfa. And then we had some, a neighbor had some, a canola field that was a disaster. He said, you can go in and cut whatever you want, you can have it for nothing. Pigeon grass, kochia, those were pretty good quality. The canola came after the rain started, so that was pretty good quality, but the Russian thistle was probably 30% of the bale, and they aren't going to eat it. So you'll see in some pictures here the amount of litter we ended up with that. This is the type of bare spots that we'll put our hay bales on. If we have a spot that we really want to impact with a lot of organic matter, we'll put the bales really close together. If we don't think we're going to need much bale grazing and we can really want to pick and choose, we'll just set them on the bare spots so the bales are pretty far apart. Again, there you got to watch for your whatever your goals are and whatever you want to achieve. We'll go through a sequence of bale grazing here. This is in our early years. There was a storm coming. So day one, we went out, we set the bales out, we were pulling the twines. We learned the hard way to set the bales on the end so twines don't freeze down to the ground. Took us a while to figure that one out, but we learned. So we're pulling twines on day one. The cows let the cows in, they start to hit it. You see the weather is not real bad day one. Day two starts getting a little blustery. Well, that's day one here, yeah. Day two started to get a little blustery. The cows, you can see they pick through the better quality bales. They're pretty much demolished, half eaten, hardly touched. So they're picking and choosing, but they're sensing that the storm is coming. This is the amazing part for me, is watching cattle and letting cattle be cattle. So this is day two here yet. Day four was a horrific, or day three was a horrific storm, and the cows really they didn't even come out. They disappeared into the hills for protection. They had their bellies full. They knew the hay was there. Back when we were feeding hay every day, we'd start the tractor up at 8 o'clock every morning. Didn't matter what the weather was. The cows would come up out of the creeks to the top of the hill to eat their hay. It didn't matter. 8 o'clock every day. Now the cows know that there's feed there. They're not worried. They fill their bellies. They go hide in the hills. They come out once the storm breaks, and they go back to picking on the hay again. The hay is buried under the snow, but they pick through it. By day 6, this is when we should have moved them out of there. On day 6, we should have moved them out of there. We got a nice litter left on the ground. We forced them. We forced them to day 7. There's hardly any litter left there at all. Yeah, we have the urine and the dung there, but as far as the hay left over, the nutrient, the litter from the hay, that was just too hard. And this was actually the same. This was the one time that we bale grazed on native prairie. And the next, you can see that for 3 years afterwards with all the cheatgrass and everything that was growing there. So this is, so even now when we bale graze, we try to leave a little more litter. If you got a really good quality bale and a really poor quality bale, the good quality bale will look like this. The poor quality bales will have, maybe up to 30% of the bale laying there yet for litter. The litter is so thick on those places that not much grows the first year, but then you got to remember it started out on a bare spot and there was nothing growing there before. So if you get a weed or something growing in there, you can see it, the odd weed here and there. The cows go through and they just slick those weeds right up. If the litter is too thick, we'll set a mineral feeder or something into it. The hoof action of the cows will help break it up. Yes, we got more bale spots than we got mineral feeders. I've heard of some people going in with a no-till drill and just pressing the litter down onto the soil. Call me lazy, call me cheap, I don't know, but to me that's diesel fuel and labor and machinery, and so we just let it break down naturally. This is just a spot we moved the cows through a bale grazing location, taking them home for hauling out the summer pasture. As they pass through, they clip the weeds. I remember Neil Dennis saying one time, "There's no such thing as a weed. It's all forage. It's all, the cattle will eat it. Give them the opportunity, they will eat it." Here's a yardstick sticking in. You got 3.5, almost 4 inches of litters left over after a bale. Yeah, so it took an extra year to break down, but the response from that for years to come was great. This particular winter, we hauled out during the winter time as we needed it, so we couldn't see where the bare spots were because there was so much snow on the ground, so we just set the bales down. This is the first year's response on a brome grass field. You can see where the bale sat, and right here I'm standing. You can see the color difference. We did a clipping on that year. Without a bale, about 1,900 pounds per acre dry matter, and you can see we're at 10 to 11 inches of height, pale green, thin. You take it, walk over 8 to 10 feet where the bale sat. Now you have dark green. You're at 18 inches of height here, dark green, thick. The part we found with bale grazing is when you come back in to regraze the sites that summer or the next year or something like that, the cows will sit on where the bale grazing was and they'll nub it to the ground before they go to the rest of the paddock. So we ended up going in and splitting the pastures down to even smaller to keep them from overgrazing on those bale grazing sites because it's such nutrition. Oops. Winter water. Some people say if there's snow on the ground, cows can survive, they don't need water. I believe that, but I'm not brave enough to go 100% with snow. We're lucky enough to have a few springs, so the cows will actually lick holes in the ice and drink from the springs. Otherwise, we have a winter tank here. All it has is a 12-inch pipe up out of the ground, bringing heat up out of the ground. There's no electricity there. The drink hole will freeze. We'll go out about every 3rd day and we'll chop the drink hole open. Is there snow there for them to lick? And if they're winter grazing stockpiled forage, you're getting a bite of snow every mouthful. We don't worry about the water except for about every 3rd day. Bale grazing will go out every 2 days and chop the ice open because they're not being able to lick as much snow. This is our apple cider vinegar. I don't know if any of you have used apple cider vinegar in your cow herd. The studies that are done on it so far, this is fairly new. It's within probably the last 6 or 8 years. The studies that are done on it, apple cider vinegar exponentially increases the rumen bugs. So you just got more rumen bugs taking care of breaking down the fibrous grass, the hard fibrous grass. So I remember hearing a story about a dairy farm one time. They said they went and looked at the dairy cows and they looked at the cow pies in the pasture. There was no little sticks of grass in the manure. The dairy cows were getting apple cider vinegar. They went to the next paddock over where the bulls were, and the bulls were not getting apple cider vinegar. There was little sticks of grass undigested in the manure. So this explodes the rumen bugs, exponentially increases the rumen bugs so that they can break down that dry forage a lot better. So that's, last winter was the first winter that we fed it all the way through the winter. We want to put this on skids so that we can drag it easier from place to place.
Where do you get it at, and how much do they go through?
If you let them pre-choice it, we actually have a self feeder with the wheel, which doesn't work in the wintertime because the wheel freezes. But in the fall of the year when the grasses are dry, they would, oh gee, they recommend, I think it is 4 ounces per 1,000-pound animal is what they should be taking. That one fall we went on and just dumped it in the self feeder and let them have at it. They were pounding through 25 ounces a day, so we said, oh, back off here. Dr. Will Winter out of Minnesota, he gets it from Idaho, is where we find it. This stuff here, now what we'll do here is we'll go out about every other day, or whenever we chop ice, or every third day, or every other day, and we just got 2.5 gallon jugs, and we carry them out in the back of the side-by-side, glug, 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 glug. So we'll put out about, I think it was, this year was like 10 jugs of apple cider vinegar, and then we'll dilute it with some water, like 3 or 4 jugs of water every 2 to 3 days. So our winter grazing and bale grazing, what we're trying to do is just save money. Every day you don't start the track, there's money in your pocket. You know, there's no diesel fuel, no, you're saving on labors. Some of the other things we've done in the past to try to save money and make things a little easier and make the cows work for us is we've done swath grazing. This was a Sudan grass field. It turned out to be Sudan grass and Russian thistle. So that's why the swaths are so fluffy here. But we would just run a poly wire across the field and give them about 2 or 3 days worth at a time. You see this was how much they got that day, because back here was already grazed off. They didn't go back other than to walk across it to go to water. We have bale grazed, or we have swath grazed and under snow that was this deep. Once they find the end of the swath, they just go. So we didn't have any baling costs, any hauling costs. We don't have to spread the manure. We do a fair bit of cover crop winter grazing. This is usually out on the summer pastures where we're hauling, before we bring the cows home in December. So we usually graze our cover crops in late November, December. One year we did our standing Sudan grass. This stuff was anywhere from 4 to 6 feet tall. We would just drive through with the side-by-side where we wanted to set up the poly wire, and let the cows have at it. Again, no cutting, no drying. We didn't have to worry about it getting moldy in the swaths if we got a rain on it. Just let them have at it. Cow feeding records for the last 3 years. 2015 and 16, we fed hay for 16 days to the cow herd. We've kind of said 3 to 5 weeks is what we want to be at. If we can be less, great. 2016 and 17, we fed for 61 days of hay. And 17 and 18, we fed for 72 days of hay. Last winter, we could have fed a lot less hay, but we didn't have the standing forage because of the drought the summer before. So we'll feed hay when we have to, but I don't like it. 61 days and 72 days about killed me. I don't like to feed that long. This is from our farm business management records. This is all feed fed for the year of 2017. So it'll be January, because farm business management is January 1 to December 31st. So this is the year of 17. Supplement apple cider vinegar. So salt, mineral, apple cider vinegar, and hay. Our cost per cow that year was $92.50. Farm business management, the average was $254 for feed per cow. The grazing cost for 2017 for us was $243, where the conventional producer was $165. So we got more grazing expenses, but we got a lot less feeding expenses. So our total cost to carry a cow for 2017 was $336 a year. Conventional rancher, the average in Western North Dakota, that's in the farm business management program, was $420, $419 a year. So that's just about an $80 savings there. That's money in our pocket by letting the cows work for us. Yes.
The all grazing part, what kind of costs were in there? Did you figure a rent or something, or how did you figure that?
Rent.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, like, how many acres were you running on there?
When we started winter grazing, everybody said you're going to have at least 20 acres per cow to run a cow year round. With our management, we're down to about 14 to 15 acres per cow per year. So, okay, very near the end. Additional savings and benefits, no manure to haul from the cow herd. We used to haul out 100 truckloads a year just from the cow herd where we fed the cows every year. So we have no more manure to haul, no specialized equipment, just a loader tractor and a hay trailer. A lot less fuel expense, less time and labor. You can plan ahead for winter conferences, winter storms. If you got a wedding or something like that, you can plan ahead and put out the feed ahead of time and let the cows have at it. It's really nice when it's storming outside and you can sit in the house with a cup of tea and watch the storm blow by, and you know the cows are behind the hill safe and they got feed available if they want it. Questions? Talking to somebody earlier here, they're asking about bale grazing on cropland. We have done it once. We were grazing corn stalks and we wanted to supplement the corn stalks with some alfalfa hay, so we were using good quality hay and setting it in the fields. There was a couple of bales that snuck by that were rank alfalfa, and we had a little more litter that we had to contend with our no-till drill. But this poor quality hay, I would use a bale processor if you're going to feed on cropland, especially with the no-till system. Personally, I don't care for bale processors just because they're very expensive and it takes a lot of horsepower to turn them, and you're feeding every day again. But they have their place. It's a tool in the toolbox, and if you need to use it, use it. But just, if you can eliminate your manure hauling by feeding on your cropland, do it. If you can extend your grazing, your winter grazing by 15 days in the fall of the year, do it. You're saving money every day that you're not starting up a tractor, every day that you're not hauling, every load of manure that you're not hauling. It's money in your pocket, and that's the bottom line. And it relates all back to a quality of life issue. I said the last thing I want to be doing is being out there in a snowstorm feeding 300 cows. So, if there's a day that it happens, you have to do it. I do it, but I'd rather spend time in the house with the kids or whatever, volunteering someplace or doing something. But no. Any other questions? I hope I. That's an issue. We're still making our own hay. And the reason being is because I look out at my neighbors. It's 95, 100 degrees outside, and they're out at 4 o'clock in the afternoon baling hay, and there's this big cloud of dust behind the baler. Well, that's all your nutrients. So I'm really finicky about the type of quality of hay I make. So if I do most of my baling at night, so I save the leaves and everything. If I could find somebody that would put up good quality hay and I could buy it, I would buy every bale. I would buy every bale. I'd love to get rid of my equipment, because then that would give me more fields to turn back into grass for grazing. That would free up a lot more of my native range for winter grazing. I could run a lot more cows.
What do you watch on the cattle? You said, well, sometimes they're starting to lose a little too much. What are you looking for in your cows to decide, okay, we need to get some hay out here? Or
a lot of it is hair coat. I mean, that hair coat will change pretty quickly, it seems like. If they're losing body condition gradually, it's a little tougher to see, but if you get a severe storm or something like that, you'll see that body condition change within a couple of short days. And you try to avoid that, but you'll notice it in the hair coat and just the activity of the cattle, just the behavior of the cattle. Now, we're not brave enough to have our calves on the cows all winter long yet. I say we did that for 2 years, we had a wreck, and we just haven't been brave enough to go back. The calves are weaned, they're put in the corral, and they're in the corral all winter long yet, and we're trying to remedy that. We're trying to get them, we're developing water on some fields so we can run them on a field that will probably eventually turn back to grass, and then feed out there on that.
Couple questions on the apple cider vinegar. Put it out like that, do they come and get it kind of hard then, and they call up, and then you come back and.
Yeah, they'll have that tire empty after about 300 cows. They'll have that tire empty within about 3-4 hours. Okay. And actually, that's with eating hay. So if you open up a fresh patch of hay and you give them that apple cider, that could last as long as 3-4 hours. If they're full of hay and they're just kind of standing around looking for something and they're curious, they'll come over, they'll clean that thing up in a half hour. So the law of averages, one cow one day will get a lot of apple cider vinegar. Hopefully the next time we take it out, the one that didn't get it the day before will. I mean, you're hoping for the law of averages there. We have a couple of boss cows in the herd that absolutely love that stuff. And they'll come up, because we go out about once a week now and we throw out 10 jugs into that lick wheel. And this one cow, she's the oldest, biggest, fattest pig on the place, and she's the first one to that feeder, and she doesn't let any other cows there until she's had her fill. So our strategy with the apple cider vinegar now is, thanks to the tour this summer over at Smalls, we have some trouble breeding back our first calf heifers coming second calvers. We usually get, instead of, the herd average has been running about 6 or 8% opens, and our first calf heifers will be 12 to 14% open. So what we're thinking we're going to do is we're going to take our first calf heifers and run them in a separate pasture. We're going to give them apple cider vinegar year round. Just that little bit of extra supplement. We're going to try that. We don't know. But yeah, we just buy it in by the tote. I don't even know what a tote costs anymore, because I bought in a whole semi-load last October, November, and I got half it left over. It was 2 years supply. So I don't even know what it costs offhand right off the top of my head now anymore, but we really liked it.
So you don't feed it during the summer?
Last summer we did with the drought. I mean, towards summer of 17, as soon as that grass started drying up, so like we turned on bulls August 10th, we started putting apple cider vinegar out like the 25th of July, because the grass is already dry.
Okay.
Sorry.
We're running out of time. Do you two figure it out later? We gotta get the next
Thank you.